Hey class, today we're going to look at one of my favorite paintings. Uh, this was done by Jacques Louis David. It's called The Death of Socrates. Uh, David was considered a pioneer in the neoclassical style. He was an 18th century French painter. He was fascinated by history. He liked ancient art, and he was kind of a guy who was determined to use his art to change the world. And with the death of Socrates, he brought politics into painting and he shook up the art scene and he won a lot of major admirers before the French Revolution. This is a real event that's depicted here, and it's a truly horrific event. In 399, before the current era, the Athenian courts convicted the philosopher Socrates of piety, declaring that he was corrupting the youth and he was not worshiping the city's gods. Impiety is defined as a lack of reverence toward the gods or towards God. So he was actually sentenced to death um, for supposedly corrupting the youth of Athens and not worshiping the gods. The death sentence involved death by poisoning, hemlock poisoning. You can see the man here in this red robe handing Socrates the cup that contains the hemlock poison that he is about to ingest. And you see people around his bed in anguish. Here were obviously the shackles that were once at Socrates' feet. Um, this man right here is another philosopher that you've probably heard of. His name is Plato, and he later on wrote that Socrates did not run from, and nor did he cry over his impending doom. And instead, he treated his execution as a final lesson. Um, he took this poison right before his students, and while he did that, he was lecturing on how he believed that the soul uh, was immortal and that he did not fear death. But nonetheless, you can see the people around him are weeping and are in a great deal of anguish. Interestingly enough, this is an idealized portrait of Socrates. Um, at the time of his execution, Socrates would have been about 70 years old, and it was unlikely that he looked quite as fit as this person uh, in the painting, right? Um, and this beefy, chiseled body here wasn't the only upgrade that he had. If you look at a bust of the philosopher that dates back to the Roman Empire, you can see that he was given quite a makeover in this painting. A softer profile and maybe a less bulbous nose. So, yeah, definitely an idealized portrait of Socrates. All right, I did say that Plato makes an appearance, and Plato is seen sitting here at this bench at the foot of Socrates' bed, facing away from him in apparent anguish. Now, he wasn't with Socrates at the time of his death, so just the fact that he's painted in here, um, that's not true to history. He was also 29 years old at the time of Socrates' death. So here he is obviously being depicted as being much older than his 29 years. This person right here, Apollodorus, he was actually thrown out of the room by Socrates. So he wasn't in the room at all. He's still painted in the picture, and he was thrown out because of his intense display of grief. So he was too grief stricken for Socrates to even allow him to continue staying in the room. He was kicked out. Interestingly enough, back here at the stairwell, you see this woman, kind of in a pinkish robe, waving goodbye. That's actually Socrates' wife, Xanthippe, and she's waving her hand goodbye, and maybe even regarded as kind of an afterthought in this painting, like she was added later, maybe towards the end of the painting or something. She's not with all these men that are weeping over Socrates' death. Next part of this painting is pretty interesting. David signed this painting twice. Um, Here on the bench that Plato is sitting at, you see that he wrote LD on the bench, um, and that is, some art historians think that maybe he did that as sort of a citation to the source material because Plato, uh, his account of the trial and death of Socrates was something he wrote about in something called Phaedo, Phaedo. That's where um, David got a lot of the information about the death. So maybe he's giving Plato credit for that in the painting. And also here it says L. David, kind of hard to see there, but it's written on this bench. And this man in this coral robe, his name is Crito. He was a companion of Socrates. He is an agriculturist. Um, some people believe that the signature placement on this bench means that David related most to Crito. The painter of the painting saw himself as someone who clutches at the morals and values that Socrates represented, just as Crito is clutching at the philosopher's thigh here. No, this just wasn't history, it was also propaganda. A few years ahead of the French Revolution, the death of Socrates was commissioned by a pair of brothers who were kind of radical political reformers who wanted there to be an upheaval of French norms and a promotion of a free market system. And to them, Socrates was a bit of a hero. Um, he was someone who sacrificed himself to his principles rather than accepting banishment and shame. So he faced his death uh, in a stoic manner with dignity and grace under pressure. And so maybe David was using this as a way to show the people who would be rebelling against the French aristocracy how they should push towards their goals, not with cowardice and outcry like Socrates' students, except for Crito and Plato, but maybe with the self-control and honor and fearlessness that is depicted in Socrates in his demeanor. So, at the time this was commissioned, was not a popular style, but today it's seen as a masterpiece. And like I said, it's one of my favorite pictures. Um, and actually, you can see this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Would like to see that someday. I haven't seen it other than in prints or on the computer. So that's a little bit about the painting, The Death of Socrates. And today we're going to look at Plato's account of the trial and death of Socrates. All right.